Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. My name is Andrew, and I'm joined alongside my co-host Jeff, as always. Jeff and I are writers and directors and passionate about the art of storytelling. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
This episode is sponsored by Gemini Crown Tech, software for all of your production needs. Stay tuned for more information later in the show. Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, and today we are chatting with Richard Overall. Richard Overall is an editor, a writer, a director, an actor, and a voice actor. He's best known for being the picture editor, voice director, and the writer on the Cartoon Network animated series The Amazing World of Gumball. And he's also involved in the new animated feature, Kensuke's Kingdom, based on the popular children's novel. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Good morning, afternoon.
And you're in London.
Yes, we're in London.
How are things in London?
It's lovely in London. Can't
Yeah.
complain.
Well, good. I've never been. I need to get over there one of these days. But hey, listen, I wanted to circle back to your childhood or to your young years. I'm curious, how did you get involved in storytelling and animation and acting? What inspired you? Did it happen when you were a child or a teenager?
Yeah, I got into watching films as a teenager, really. My gateway was James Bond.
Oh, interesting.
James Bond films. And that
Who's your favorite Bond?
I was close between Timothy Dalton and Roger Moore. I can't decide. I love them.
Very
both.
good.
I love them all. They were quite an interest because you can see every aspect of the filmmaking. It made me learn what an editor and a director and a producer was just by digging into this one, by going deep on one sort of series. So that's what alerted me to the different jobs. And then I went and academically studied film and literature at a university. And I thought, that's okay, but I'd rather make them than sort of talk
Right.
about. So then I went to the National Film and Television School, which is in just outside London, where I specialised in editing for two years. Because I made a short film at university, and it was the editing I took to most. I directed it and what have you, and it was a bit stressful. I mean, the directing was fun, but I just didn't really. I was 90. I didn't really have the confidence to push with
Right.
that. But I thought editing. I know where I am. I was sort of a bit, quieter and techie, and it suited me. So yeah, I did 2000 to 2002. Studied editing at the National Film and Television School. That wasn't just animation, though. That you had all the documentary, fiction, and animation all funneled through 6 overworked editors for 2 years. It was great.
But you also do voice acting. How did you go from editing into acting?
That was accidentally, really, because when you edit, when I got at the end of the 2 years, I thought that the animation was the editing I enjoyed most because you can get involved up front and you can help a little bit more with the story. But when you're editing an animation, the easiest thing to do is to do all the temporary voices yourself first.
Oh, interesting.
Gradually, you lose all your inhibitions and put everything into this, what we call a scratch track. So all the voices, all the performances. And it sort of grew from that, really. Sometimes they said, oh, we'll just keep your voice on this. You did all right. And it's just the practice of not being shy on microphone and what have you and understanding the story. So I do. And that eventually I became a voice director for animation, directing the voices on things I was already cutting, almost just for efficiency, really, because I knew how it was meant to be at that point.
Interesting.
So, and then I would throw in the odd voice. So I haven't voiced too many things, but I do pop up. I tend to get ineffectual, nerdy men, which is not a stretch. And I get a lot of chickens and pigs, which is weird, just animal noises. So it's quite niche. But yeah, the switch from editing to voice directing was a sort of slightly weird path, but
Well, it makes sense, though. I mean, from a practical standpoint, it makes sense because you're trying to, create these scenes, and why not just do the voices so you can figure out, the technique of animation you want. I'm curious about that. When you do the voices yourself, if they do change to another actor, does that impact the animation you're creating? And do you have to go back and retrofit things, or?
In editing animation, you do it all up front, really. You create this thing called an
Really?
animatic, like a blueprint for the whole film. So you'll get the whole thing timed. I mean, on Gumball, for example, there were meant to be 10 10, 11 minutes long. And we would get it within 5 seconds of that, just with storyboard frames. So you'd have storyboards, so storyboards and sound effects, temporary music, and temporary voice. You'd get the whole thing worked out. You would rewrite on the fly. They'd redraw the storyboard. You get it so that you'd forget that it had to be animated. The animatic with storyboards would work so well that the job was done, really, as far as I can say. Okay, that all works. Then it will get better when they animate it, but the blueprint was there, so it's so they don't have to over animate because it's expensive to animate. So you give them frame accurate shot timings for every shot.
That's
And
interesting. I- I'd like to dig into the weeds a little bit about that, the process of editing for animation and also creating the animation. So I'm assuming you have a writer's room, a story, you're creating the stories for the show. And then you do storyboards. Talk me through that again. You do storyboards, then animatics?
yeah, the Amazing World of Gumball was the best example of that because it was the most rigorous and thorough um, way of doing it, and it paid off because those episodes are all good and all funny because of the work that went in. It was so they'd get a writer's room, which I wasn't in, and they would break down a story, and then they'd work at that, and then they'd have three drafts of that, for example. Then they'd pass it to a storyboard artist. He'd draw the whole thing up and pin the whole thing up on a wall. The directors would then go through that and say, "Oh, that joke works. That needs a different thought. That doesn't make sense. Stage this different." There'd be like I think 3 rounds of storyboarding, pitching. Then it would come to edit. We'd put it all together, and like, oh, that still doesn't work. So what can we do there? Then we'd revoice it. Then we're like, well, we've used there's far too many words in that joke, and then well, we can just cut that bit out. So it's amazing how at every stage you think, oh, that's done, it's written. Oh, that's done, it's storyboarded, and it was never done. We kept improving and improving and pushing. The two directors on it had really high standards in the best way, and they wouldn't settle unless a joke worked. So sometimes we'd sit there in the edit suite for an afternoon, sort of just for an hour, try to work out what can we do that's funnier than what we've got. So you
Interesting.
pushed. It was 264 episodes, I think, of that. So it was quite. Every episode was difficult because every episode was like, oh, okay, we need to make this funnier or make more sense or something original or so. The edit was like the third rewrite, really. Then so you do all the scratch voices, and even doing that, me and co-editor Tony Harwood, um, we just do mistakes or try things out and make stuff up as we recorded it as well, and just accidentally discover funny voices or funny jokes that would end up in there as well. So that the process of editing was like a bit of a third rewrite. Then we'd lock it. Then I'd go and direct the actors. So I'd get on the line to these amazing 3 kids in LA who would voice the main characters, and then the other actors are in London. Cut those in. Then it was locked, and then it went to the like, layout department and animation and everything. So you always had the final voices in the animatic before they animated. So you weren't ever post syncing to animation. I think that
So
would be the
you're
most.
so you're editing the animatic
Yeah.
before it goes to interesting.
And it comes back and you cut it all in, and there's room then to tweak. I used to give myself 5 seconds leeway to tighten up across a 10-minute episode. Any more than that, and you just get producers saying, "Why are we animating too much?" So you have to. I remember I worked on Corpse Bride very, very briefly. The Tim Burton film was a very low-level editor. It was my first job, which was a stop motion film. And every shot on that, they had 8 frame handles either end of the shot. So the editor actually had handles. But I've never been on anything with that luxury since. It's
Eight frame
always to
handles
the
on
frame.
on every shot.
Yeah, which you
Interesting.
think is not much, but that builds up. But it's so with stop frame, I think it's because they have to ramp up into the action and make the hook up smooth, so that would just give you that cut point. But
Interesting.
in that, I've done mainly hand drawn stuff since that, and you don't get that.
Well, I'm curious about I'm curious about something. Gumball was wildly popular. I know our producer Melody, her kids were big fans of Gumball. Did you ever run into a fan or an audience member that changed the way you saw your work?
We did, as a whole team, we did probably listen a little bit too much to Twitter and things. Well, no, I mean, the fans are great, but you have to remember the vocal ones aren't necessarily the majority.
Right, 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 right,
So real animation fans were into the stories that were very meta, the very clever stories where
right.
it was more reflexive and clever, which were good, but I don't think that the mass people really they wanted just funny episodes, but I think we did tend to do a few more meta ones for the deep fans sometimes.
Right,
But that's
right.
good. There was something for everybody. So that was, I remember that was like, oh, are we doing more of these sorts, are we? So, but, but that, yeah, but that's because it is quite nice to get, because it's quite hard to get feedback because most people just watch it, think that was good, move on, don't
Right.
think about it. Really, that's the majority of your viewership, which is great because you know they're enjoying it, but they don't have to tell you. And but there are some real keen super fans. There's a website that has more details than any of us can remember
Oh, wow.
of every character and every plot. And like, we used to use it as a reference. Like,
No
what happened?
kidding.
Yeah, what happened in that story? Who's been in what episode before? And we'd look on this fan's website. It was brilliant. I did have the
That's
date,
amazing.
so they're a lovely fan group. Um, and the cast was fabulous as well. I think I was on it for nearly 10 years, and it was really a hard and brilliant 10 years. And nothing, it's a shame if you're on after someone's had so very high standards, and even though it's difficult, you always want to have a director that pushes you further than that.
Right.
It's horrible to have a director that's like, yeah, it's fine, that'll do. I'm like, no, I don't think it is, but it's their place to push. You can, I think, as an editor, you push as hard as you can. But it was lovely on that show to be constantly challenged and stretched. But most directors I've worked with are like that as well, which is great.
Let's pivot over to Kensuke's Kingdom. I'm curious, how did you get involved in that project?
Well, it was whilst I was working doing that 10 years on Gumball, I was also moonlighting for a company called Lupus Films, which they were 10 minutes up the road in London, and I was always attached to their hand-drawn animated films. They there's there was a sort of a cartoon what they called comic book storybook artist called Raymond Briggs, who was famous for The Snowman. There was a film called The Snowman, and they had the sort of the Raymond Briggs rights, and so they made the sequel to The Snowman. You see a hand-drawn half-hour film for television, and then he wrote a sort of a memoir of his parents in graphic novel form called Ethel and Ernest, which we made into a feature in about 2016. And so I always had these sort of little hand-drawn films in the background because I could just about juggle both. So I'm just sort of their in-house editor. I do the animatics. You see, when it goes into full production, they have an assistant or associate editor who keeps up with the rushes and stuff. But I do all the upfront work for them, and they're a lovely company. And so Kensuke's Kingdom, I think I had my first meeting in about 2016 for that, and they'd already been trying to raise the funds for about 10 years before that, I think. And finally, it came to fruition in 2020 as we locked down, as everybody was working from home. So it was one of those typical things like spend 15 years getting the money, and then they're like, okay, go. It's like, oh, suddenly, well, these storyboard panels were coming in. I was just in the bedroom at home, cutting it, zooming with the two directors.
I'm curious, does the style of animation, like hand-drawn animation versus computer animation, does that impact the editing? And I don't mean technically, but does it impact the editing in terms of rhythm and how quickly or slowly you cut?
Not really. I mean, Gumball and Kensuke's Kingdom and Ethel couldn't be more different, but that's not
Right,
because of the medium. It's the style. You've got a
right.
very fast-paced thing, or quite meditative, emotional story feature. So that affects the pacing. And preschool as well. You do have to sort of adjust your brain to the tempos of these things because I think when I went onto one of the like Kensuke's Kingdom, I was still a little bit in Gumball mode. And I had to just say, okay, I can slow down. I can hold on a face long enough for the animator to draw an emotional change. Whereas Gumball was in, out, gag, gag, gag. So you do have to sort of just adjust to the genre more than the technique. And I remember when I started Gumball, we'd just come off a preschool series, Little Princess. And so we were at preschool pace where every line had a beat after it so that the 5-year-old could process it and you move. And so I think our first cut of a Gumball episode was 18 minutes long because we timed it at preschool
Oh,
pace.
right.
The director thought, oh gosh, I think we nearly got fired. But we then sped up, we got there, we got the pace up in the end, but it was just so it's more that than the medium really. I imagine I've never cut CG animation which I'd like to do because you got more dimensionality, and I think like action sequences and things like that would suit CG more, and I think you can get a bit faster and cuttier because obviously with 2D animation, every background, if you do an angle change, it's a whole new drawn background because it's not. Whereas in CG, you've got a 3D set, so you can just move the camera
Oh,
for
right,
asset.
right.
So you've got much more flexibility. So I think they can afford to be cuttier. So um, they weren't. I've never. Yeah, even the action scene in Kensuke's Kingdom, there's like one big action scene. It was fairly sedate by CG standards in terms of how many shots we can do because you just thought "Wow, there's just too many backgrounds. You have to keep changing the angle and what have you.
What do you think are the unique challenges in editing animation that maybe would not be there in live action editing? Or are there unique challenges?
Well, I suppose the overall thing is the same, which is clarity of storytelling and certainly from my point of view, how short can you make it before you lose any sense or emotion?
Right.
So that are those sort of key tenets of editing, which you go across any genre or any technique. But what you don't have, obviously, in animation, you don't have a batch of rushes and you're responding to a performance and you're building it from shots and options. You don't get that. I don't get to watch an actor perform and try and see something in their eyes or anything and choose that shot. So I lose that element, which I miss a bit sometimes. But you do get to determine the whole timing of a performance ahead of time. You sort of create the performance. So in Kensuke's Kingdom, you had shots of there's a little boy Michael and Kensuke the old man, and they're talking to each other. Well, they're not talking to each other. They don't have any dialogue because they can't speak the same language. So you just had to think, well, I could be on Kensuke's face for a second or 5 seconds here, and you just have to and you've only got two drawings to play with in the storyboard, so you just have to fill in the gaps yourself and try and work out how long to hold anything. So that's fairly unique challenge of animation, the whole pre-timing of every shot. You're pre-visualizing a performance. So the animator can then look at that and go, "Oh, you've not given me enough time, or I need more time." But I think we sort of got it quite right in Kensuke's Kingdom. I never really got many requests to extend shots, and I didn't have to trim too many either because you want to sort of animation, 2D animation can go dead if you're not if it settles for a little bit too long, even a frame, your eye sort of notices that it's just gone still. So you have to sort of keep it moving. So there's a little bit of fine cutting to do at the end, but mainly, yeah, all that timing is predetermined, and the timing of the voice performance, you can speed up. The back and forths between characters can be sped up and slowed down. I suppose that's the same in live action, but I think you've got a little bit more control within shots. You can time up. You can retime an actor's performance within a shot. Obviously, in animation, because all you've got is the drawing and the voice, and you can do what you want with that.
Well, what about sound? And it's easy when you're talking about animation to be concentrating on the pictures, the visuals, and the voices, but there's also the soundscape. In Kensuke's Kingdom, you've got the ocean, you've got the birds, you've got all the animals. Um, and in Gumball, I'm sure there are lots of, crazy practical sounds and things going on. How do you, as an editor, approach the soundscape while you're doing the edit, knowing that this is going to be a moment that we need to let breathe because music's coming in, or this moment needs to have this kind of sound happening over here. How do you work that into your edit?
It's fully integrated into as I cut the sound and
Oh,
music.
interesting.
I do. I think I don't know if everybody does, but I use the sounds. I don't like atmospheres and stuff like bird song and sea. I don't worry about that particularly because that's a later thing. I think that's sort of more
And
dated.
when you say you use sounds, are you talking about like a temp track or scratch sound? What do
Yeah,
you? Okay.
actually, I have a library of sounds, or I make it up. Like on Kensuke's Kingdom, I had for all the footsteps, for example, like library of footsteps. It was people walking on creaky treehouse floors or sand, and like I got a load of I put garden trellis on the carpet, and I foleyed as I went. I could then
Interesting.
I acted it because if you act it out yourself, you get a sense of the pace. So I use sound effects mainly for helping me with the timing.
And the rhythm, I'm assuming the rhythm of the scene. Yeah.
Because sometimes you think something's not working and it's just you've got the wrong sound in there, or the sound's in the wrong place, or there's a transition that's not working, and you think, well, if I just put the incoming sound is a door slam, something to propel you,
Right.
all the standard tricks, but you have to think of all that in advance a bit more, I think. So I spend a lot of time on that. On Kensuke's Kingdom, we screened it in a theatre at the BFI for at animatic stage, and I spent a long time doing the mix, and we watched it, and it was very sad. We watched it like a film. It felt fully engaging, and we sort of forgot it wasn't animated because there was such a rich soundtrack, and the music was all very carefully edited and placed in
That's
conjunction
interesting.
with the directors. We all had pretty much the same taste in film scores, which helped. We all liked big melodic, old-fashioned, well, called old-fashioned. I called them better film scores. So we knew what we were doing, and so we spent a lot of time building that up. And again, the music helps you time it out, and I tend to overdo it a little bit in an animatic because if you haven't got the emotion,
Overdo what the music mean, or
overdo the music a little bit on animatic because if you haven't got the emotions drawn or the action, the music sort of fills in the gap and holds
right.
your hand a little bit more as you're watching the animatic version. And then when the composer comes on, he or she can tone it down a little bit. If you think, oh, I can see it. I don't need to be governed quite so much by the
Right.
music at this point. So the the music on the animatic version is always full on and it's great. That's one of my favorite bits of doing it, really.
Well, what animators inspired you when you were launching your career? Ralph Bakshi or Tex Avery or any of those animators from back in the day that you were fans of?
Yeah, no, none really. I'm not. I like working in animation and I like the finished product, but I'm not like an animation geek sort of thing. I'm not really into the animation side because I sort of see my job finishing at the animatic and then I just trust that it's going to be brilliant with
Interesting.
it. Like I don't have a great design. I don't get involved in design or animation. I can see the rushes and I can see what's working, but I'm not totally engaged in the craft of the animation. I'm just focused on the story really and the timing. I think that's where my strengths are. So it's I'm always blown away when it comes in. I thought, goodness, these people can really draw. It's amazing. And but I'm not like a scholar of animation technique in itself, which I think might help. I don't know. I think you can get away. It's sometimes craft for craft's sake in some animations, or maybe not feature, but short animations and things are lovely, but they're more of an exploration of a craft. And I've never really been involved in those films, and those films don't tend to use editors. That the animator sort of just goes away and does a wonderful thing of their own. So I, but I think I think I have to be careful here because I don't want to. Yeah, I would say crafts for craft's sake is something I like to avoid. And if you're not really into animation, I wouldn't indulge such long pieces of just beautiful swirling, whatever animation it is.
Right, right, right.
The average person might get bored. That's my sense, and that's my big thing. I'm constantly conscious of being boring in a film. And I really struggled on Kensuke's Kingdom with that because there's a big chunk in the middle. It's not boring, definitely not a boring film, but it was at points a boring film. There were versions that were a bit boring because there's a section when he lands on this beach and nothing really happens and nothing should happen. He's stranded, he can't find water, he can't find food, he doesn't know where he is. And it had to feel like he was desperate. And he had to be there a number of days and you think, I've got to hold this for as long as I can before something happens, so that when something happens, which is he gets given some water by this mysterious person, we really feel his relief and that he's been there. And like the first couple, oh God, that went on for ages, and it was probably only a couple of minutes in it, but it felt so
Right.
long. So right, take out a couple of days and nights, and then when he gets the water, you feel, oh, he hasn't been there long enough. So it was just how far can we push this without it getting boring? And
Right,
that was the
right.
hard, really. Just I didn't. And I'm so conscious when I watch it with an audience. I can sort of feel them just about to look at their watch. I think when something happens and then you're on a safe ground, an event happens. But I think there's probably about 7 or 8 minutes of really no narrative bumps at all, and that's quite scary for me because I like things to keep moving. So
Well, it's a balance between keeping the story urgent, but also serving the story at that moment in the film. And so that makes sense that you want the audience to start becoming uncomfortable so that they can feel his desperation. So that does make sense. I'm curious about something else. Are there any types of stories that you would love to work on that you haven't had a chance yet?
Action. I
Ah,
haven't done
back to James
that.
Bond.
That's it. And I know
We've
won't, no
come
one,
full circle.
no one will let me do a live action thing now, because once you're an animation editor, that's you're off on that path, which is lovely because it's a great industry and everybody's so nice in animation. But you can get action animation, and I'd like to be involved in that. Tell you what I'd like to do. When Amazon Prime make the Young James Bond series, uh, animated Young James Bond series, that's the job I want. I'm sort of willing it into being. It doesn't exist. There are these fabulous young Bond novels. I'm like, that would be great. A bit of action and James Bond and animation. I'll be,
That'd be
I'll, I'll,
awesome.
I'll be annoyed if that happens and I'm not on it. Yeah, I think I like action cinema, and that would be my dream to get involved somehow in that. I got a little bit of in Kensuke's Kingdom. There was a big action sequence which was lovely to work on, with like three different planes of stuff happening, and I hadn't really had a chance to work on anything like that before. And that took some working out how to keep three plates spinning and different people going in different directions. So that gave me a taste for it.
And is that something again you do you address that differently when you storyboard and do the animatics if it's something intense like that, or is that just still the same technique?
I think it was. I found it. Yeah, I found that I don't really remember cutting that because it felt quite natural in terms of there were things happening. A lot of stuff after a slow period of stuff happened, but subtly. Suddenly there was the villains, and there was a hero, and there was action, and there was a big chase with a monkey. So you knew what you you knew what you're doing. I thought, okay, it's going in one direction, and then it was a matter of just I kept rejigging the order to try and make sure you knew where everybody was and didn't let one strand die when another took over. So, but that
Well,
was a lovely sequence to cut. That was one of the easier bits, weirdly, and it was the first we scored as well. And it's got this amazing score that as soon as the composer, brilliant composer called Stuart Hancock, got his hands on it, it like he's just flattered every cut. I was like, oh, this is brilliant. He just poked through every little moment, gave suspense, and shaped the whole thing as well. And we got that cue very early. I think we got that cue before it was animated. It was still in animatic form, because that was really good to know that that was going to work. So he sort of bound the whole thing together, because we had the composer involved like a year ahead of picture lock on this, which is very rare.
oh, interesting.
And so we were back and forth developing themes and stuff all throughout the edit, which was a great lot.
So you've clearly edited a lot of different projects, but I'm curious, when you look back on your career, is there one scene that you look back on that still speaks to you and inspires you? Something that you've cut?
The final sequence in Kensuke's Kingdom, where they say goodbye to each other, it took some work to get that emotional flow working. But in the end, it kept making me cry every time I was cutting it, and I thought, this is something great here. And I can and when I'm in the cinema theaters watching it with people, I can hear tissues come out of pockets at the same point every time.
Oh,
This
wow.
is it. And so that's certainly satisfying, one that's going to stay with me. Um, and there was a really late edition, which wasn't from any of us. It was from an external script consultant who said at the end, the boy should bow to Kensuke when he goes, because
Oh,
Kensuke bowed.
wow.
It wasn't in there. They'll hate me saying this, but it wasn't us that came up with it. And when we put it in, I'm like, God, that's so obvious. We'd all written, the writers, amazing writers, everyone been involved with this, the wonderful pair of directors. I'd been on it for ages, get this far, and between us, hadn't thought of that final bow. And when that happened, I was like, oh, that really chokes me up every time. And it's like,
Yeah, that's a
it
great
just goes,
moment.
you just got to keep pushing for new ideas. Again, don't give up until just keep accepting ideas and pushing and trying. And that's also the lesson from Gumball. It's like, it's not over. It's not over at the script. It's not over at the storyboard, and it's not even over when you've cut it. You can keep plussing and plussing until the last minute.
Right.
So I really loved that when that happened in that film.
Well, before we wrap up, Richard, for people who want to follow your career, how can they track you down? Are you an Instagram person or you have a website?
My Instagram is mainly pictures of me doing jigsaw puzzles, which is editing adjacent, isn't it? Which
I
no,
guess it kind of is. Yeah.
I don't have. I'm not really on social media, but there's some nice things coming out. I can mention a few things that are
Oh, sure.
coming out
Yeah.
right now. That mainly I've pivoted in the last year or two more to voice directing. I cut Kensuke's Kingdom, but after that I've been voice directing some really lovely series. And there's one that's just 2 days ago came out on Netflix called Wolf King, which is a big CG animated young adult series with fabulous cast. So that's really, really, really proud of that one. And there's a lovely series on the BBC called Mojo Swap Tops, with great voice performances, kids, which was very satisfying directing some kids and got some good stuff. And another one about to come out called Piri Penguins. And then there's a new thing coming at the end of the year on Disney Plus, a big sort of mystery comedy animation show called Sunny Ridge 3, which I think is going to be fantastic. It's very funny and like 22-minute episodes, good chunky stories. And I cut a few of those as well, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they come out. Again, it's weird that I cut them and then I don't see them. I do the animatic, and then a year later I see the finished thing.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, I forgot it was going to be animated as well because I just concentrate on the animatic. So that's going to be exciting for me to watch when it's on telly and see what it looks like. So yeah, there's some lovely series coming out now, and yeah, but I'm sort of got my eye open now for cutting something new. I'm ready to cut again. I like to sort of balance the two things, some voice directing and some editing, and ideally both on the same project, just because it feels they go hand in hand together, I think.
Well, Richard, it's been lovely chatting with you. You've done some outstanding work, and let's circle back sometime. I'd love to have you on the show again and chat about some of the other projects you're working on.
Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk to you.
All right, and if you ever make it down to Austin for South by Southwest or Austin Film Festival, you let me know.
I will do that. Thank you.
All right, you take care.
Bye-bye.
This episode is sponsored by Gemini Crown Tech, owned and operated by Stephanie Moore and Stephanie Harrison. We at Gemini Crown Tech have covered all your production management needs with our proprietary software. Please visit our website at www.geminicrowntech.com and use the code FMP for Filmmaker Mixer podcast listeners, so we know how you heard about us.
Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.